G'day, and it's Kareem here again on Does It Matter? I thought I'd make another video about the COVID-19 virus, predominantly because, well, one, it's occupying all our minds and thoughts at this point in time, and it's a significant concern, both in its direct impact and its economic impact. But looking at the origins of it, it seems to have developed in domesticated animals in Chinese live air markets, where animals are killed, kept, stored in cages on hand, where meat is processed from the dead animals on hand, fresh, and provided by vendors to customers. So it has a lot of the hallmarks of previous sources of MERS and SARS, H1N1. It's connected to the animal meat trade, particularly in Eastern markets, and particularly China being the greatest culprit. But is that the only major factor? And something that I can't help but think is important is all the other variables, the other circumstances that have made it possible for this disease to spread as fast and as far as it has, and for it to actually adopt the nature it has, which is an extremely contagious, super contagious, long incubation rate, droplet and air transmitted disease. Like it's in every way except its lethality the worst thing we've ever seen, and thank goodness its actual direct lethalness is much less than some of the more serious plagues in the past have been. It's still significantly stronger than the flu, despite the ministrations and denial of propagandists. It's between 34 and 80 times more lethal than the flu. It has a much higher transmission rate, much more contagious, a much higher transmission rate per person, per contact, and it has that really long 14 to 28 day incubation rate. So essentially it is a chameleon, a highly infectious chameleon. But it's not just that, it's not just the meat markets that created it and brought literally millions of different animals and bugs and humans together in vast open air slaughter and vending pits, where you're just creating, warm air, the access, the presence of animals that would never normally in nature mix. A living open air abattoir. It contains many of the recipes for mutation and microbial metamorphosis into something quite dangerous. And it's been happening since 2003, since the first outbreaks in China. We've been seeing it happen over and over again. But it has been increasingly facilitated by a global population that travelled far more in the last 10 years than they did in the previous, and more in the previous 10 years than they did in the previous 20. So we've got people travelling all over the world, trading, doing business. We've got far more goods travelling across borders, and we've just recently discovered that COVID-19 can last as long as 9 days on the surface. It's extremely rigorous. So the conditions that create it aren't going to go away in a hurry. There are numerous commentators in China saying these meat and live air markets are not going anywhere. There's far too much demand for them. The Chinese have an equally strong desire for meat than does the Western world, and they will have their meat one way or the other. And all those markets do is move. They move from one province to the other, one town to the other, one location to the other. People are paid off, and trade continues as usual, and we will see more bugs, more mutations as a result. Now, in the long run, synthesizing and cloning of meat will take care of this, but it could easily take another couple of decades for that to make its way past both the cultural and commercial barriers that exist in China and other countries as well. In the meantime, they are going to be cooking up fresh bugs for us, whether they mean to or not, and for themselves in the process. I mean, it's not some insidious scheme in some Wuhan biolab, as much as people would like to say. It is the product of inadvertent behaviour by people to meet market desires, and that is usually the case for a lot of the worst things that happen in the world, rather than direct or diabolical conspiracy. People are travelling all over the world in record numbers. Tens and hundreds of millions of people travel. I think it was well over 120 million last year travelled by plane across the borders of their country into the borders of another country. So I could be out there. I'd have to check that again, but I know it's well over 100 million. It's an astounding number of people, and when you have that much trade and literally billions and billions of packages moving every quarter, hundreds of millions a month and billions every quarter, you're dealing with a volume of potentially transmissible vectors that boggles the mind, and I don't know how on earth we control it, says me touching my face. Don't take my example for this. But yeah, the conditions for an era of plagues are here. We have sourced material in Southeast Asian and Asian countries that isn't going to change in a hurry. We have conditions on the ground, we have conditions in the air, conditions on over the sea, maritime trade, air trade. We have massive amounts of tourism and inter-exchange between countries for education purposes as well as tourism. There are just so many ways in which we are now interlinked. We are part of a global culture. There is no culture from Norway to Antarctica, and from the United States to Australia, crossing the world longitudinally and latitudinally. There isn't any place that isn't deeply connected to other places and in desperate need of them. And as a result, those diseases will transmit. I believe that quarantines are effectively useless if we don't close borders almost immediately upon detection of infection. The only way to stifle these infections is to starve them of bodies, and shutting down a country that is dependent on global trade, dependent on so many interactions with the rest of the world for at least a month. It would have to be at least a month, probably quite a bit longer, because transmission rates aren't identical. People will catch the disease and have it for a few days before manifesting the disease. Other people will have it for 2, 3, or even 4 weeks of incubation before manifesting the disease. It's not across the board. Some people will show almost no symptoms and become super spreaders, while other people get deathly ill. The variables in terms of times and scheduling and observation are so varied that it's an error-prone process from the very beginning, and our economies are just not built. We're not built economically to withstand 2, 3, 4 months of isolation from the rest of the world. I just don't see how we can do that. So I agree with other commentators on YouTube and the net who have been suggesting that we are entering an era of plagues, that we already were in it, and that now we're going to see more and more effective plagues. We're going to see more mutations. Some will be more effective than others. If we're very lucky we won't see a Spanish flu for at least another decade or two or three, by which time hopefully modern medical science will have advanced sufficiently to create some kind of a genetic or nanotechnological cure to that. But it's a stretch to think that the rash of bugs that we've had, SARS 1 and 2, MERS, H1N1 and others, are not going to increase as the variables that produce them also increase. I mean, people are travelling more. The appetite for meat is increasing in not only China but other countries that are industrialising and rising from third to second world, second to first world. That isn't going away. And yes, modern technology over the next 30 or 40 years will certainly meet the challenge of answering almost every conceivable problem, even death itself, but it's going to take time, and in the meantime we're going to be saddled with the consequences of decisions previously made before science could resolve them. And this era of plagues may well be one of the consequences of the delay between science resolving the issues and the causes that go back to practices that are often centuries old and have become increasingly intensified by technology, not causing the very proliferation of pandemics across the planet. I'm not sure what this means for us socially. I suspect that it may well mean a growth in, unfortunately, in conservatism, fear of the migrant, fear of the other, for legitimate reasons, unfortunately, as well as illegitimate ones. It may see a return of the growth of certain forms of prejudice that we thought we were putting behind us, and it may also stifle vital economic trade that will drive the very technologies that could liberate us, and will retard them as a result. So yeah, I'll give it some more thought and some more research and talk about this at length, but I suspect very strongly that we are entering an era unprecedented in modern times, at least, where wave after wave of plagues that we have some control over and some influence on, but effectively we won't be able to stop spreading, perhaps only slow them, will become the new norm, and the economic and social impacts of that go far beyond what I could probably sum up or